Cord had perfected the art of making silence loud. Every pause vibrated with layered protocols, translated etiquette.
The mission parameters are locked. We proceed as planned. Precision is critical. No deviations.
The translation field shimmered across the
The
vaulted
readings
chamber,
confirm it.
projecting
We must
holographic
act now.
subtitles in
The
12
projections are
languages, each
unstable.
color-coded
Then we
by
adapt.
rank.
Deploy
Blue
the
for the High
contingencies.
Council, gold for the Queen,
The alignment is
a murky
near.
gray
We
green
must
for
be
everyone
ready.
else who
We
mattered
are
just
ready,
enough
my
to
leader.
speak, but
Then
not
rise.
enough to be
The
heard.
time has come.
Silas Varn stood where he
Envoy,
always
we
stood,
gather to unite
17
our
meters
worlds.
from the eastern
We
pillar,
are ready, leader.
4 meters left
Then
of the
let us
secondary
proceed.
security node. Exactly where no one's attention naturally landed. He had learned that if you remained still long enough in a room full of beings obsessed with status displays, you effectively became furniture, functional, ignored, occasionally leaned against by accident. He didn't mind. Furniture rarely got blamed for diplomatic incidents. The argument currently polluting the air had something to do with border security, or trade routes, or possibly both, wrapped in enough ceremonial language to make a simple request for military funding sound like philosophical revelation. Chancellor Vexthor dominated the center platform, his forearms gesturing in patterns that looked important but communicated nothing. The hologram floating above his head displayed a tactical star map complete with threat vectors and resource allocations. Silas noted distantly that the asteroid position data was 3 weeks out of date. He did not point this out. Pointing things out was how you stopped being invisible. 8 months. He had been standing in this chamber for 8 months across 47 sessions, listening to 214 hours of arguments that could have been settled in 20 minutes if anyone actually cared about solutions instead of speeches. His feet knew the exact temperature of the polished stone floor. His shoulders knew the precise angle required to look attentive without appearing interested. His eyes knew where to focus so that he appeared to be watching everything while revealing he was watching nothing. It was a skill he had not planned to use again. Titan Station had taught him many things. How to read intelligence data that no one else believed. How to write reports that predicted disasters with uncomfortable accuracy. How to watch 12,000 people die because the truth arrived in the wrong format delivered by the wrong person at the wrong time. So Silas had quit, found a quiet job, guard duty on Velkar, a capital world of the Zareth Imperium, night shifts preferred, minimal interaction required. The kind of work where success meant nothing happened and no one remembered you were there. Perfect. Except he still noticed things. The security grid hummed at the wrong frequency. Someone had recalibrated the sensors poorly, probably 6 weeks ago, making them too sensitive to dramatic hand gestures and too blind to actual threats. 2 nobles had been briefly restrained yesterday by shimmering energy cuffs after arguing too enthusiastically about grain subsidies. The translation field lagged by 0.7 seconds on certain ceremonial dialects, not enough to matter in casual conversation. Just enough to let careful speakers hide key words in the delay, saying one thing while the subtitles claimed another. Vexthor's hologram flickered. The data stream refreshed every 30 seconds, pulling from archives instead of live feeds. Old intelligence masquerading as current analysis. Silas filed it away. He filed everything away. 8 months of observations stored in the mental architecture he had built during 12 years of intelligence work. Pattern recognition. Threat assessment. The quiet cataloging of details that meant nothing individually but formed devastating pictures when assembled. He had promised himself he would never assemble those pictures again. A ripple passed through the chamber. Subtle. Unmistakable. The Queen had shifted her attention. Silas noticed it not because he was special, but because he was bored. Boredom sharpened perception the way hunger sharpened taste. He had been watching the light play across the chamber's curved walls, counting the micro-adjustments in the environmental controls when the quality of silence changed. Queen Lysandra sat upon a throne that had been designed to inspire awe and mostly inspired neck pain in anyone forced to look up at it for extended periods. She was tall even for her species. 2.1 meters of elegant alien physiology, with skin the color of pale jade, and hair like platinum wire braided in patterns that shifted daily. Her eyes were larger than human, set slightly wider and capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Those eyes were currently tracking him. Silas resisted the urge to check his uniform for stains. Humans had a habit of assuming attention meant trouble. In this court, it usually did. The Queen's gaze slid past generals' advisors and genetically optimized courtiers like a system scan dismissing non-critical files. It stopped on him with the precision of targeting software acquiring lock. The chamber noticed. Arguments faltered. Holographic displays froze mid-gesture. 237 beings of 14 different species turned to see what had captured their ruler's focus. They saw a human guard, average height for his species, average build. No ceremonial decorations. No rank insignia beyond the simple silver stripe indicating palace security 3rd tier. Nothing to distinguish him from the 60 other guards scattered throughout the complex. Except that the Queen was looking at him, and everyone knew that Queen Lysandra did not waste attention. You. Her voice carried without amplification cutting through the translation field's hum. The holographic subtitles materialized in gold, confirming what everyone had heard but could not quite believe. Silas kept his expression neutral. Military training, intelligence protocols, the same mask he had worn while delivering casualty reports to officers who did not want to hear them. Yes, your radiance, the protocol required the honorific. Survival suggested not offering anything beyond it. The Queen tilted her head, studying him with open curiosity. Around them, the court held its collective breath. Vexthor's 4 arms had frozen in an incomplete gesture, his hologram still rotating through outdated data no one was watching anymore. Do you find this discussion useful? The question landed like a flashbang in a quiet room. Silas understood immediately that he was being tested. Not for loyalty, not for knowledge. For something more dangerous, honesty. He had several options: defer to the Chancellor, claim insufficient expertise, offer bland agreement. All safe, all expected, all lies. 8 months of silence. 12,000 dead because no one listened. The weight of Titan Station pressed against his chest. The memory of writing reports that collected dust. The faces of colonists he had never met but had tried to save with words no one read. He had promised himself never again. It's very impressive, your radiance. The words came out calm, even, professional. I've never seen so many beings agree so passionately about different things at the same time. There was a delay while the translation field processed the statement, then a longer delay while the minds processed the implication. Irony did not translate well in most languages. In this court, it translated like a declaration of war. A laugh escaped the Queen before she could stop it. Not loud, not long. Just a brief, bright sound that detonated in the silence with the force of an antimatter charge. It was the kind of laugh that said someone had finally told her something true in a place where truth was rationed like oxygen. The court froze. Chancellor Vexthor dropped his primary gesture, causing the hologram to flicker. The asteroid data began projecting the wrong system entirely, as if out of spite. Nobles stared. Guards shifted weight. The translation field stuttered, struggling to find appropriate subtitles for concepts it had never been asked to render. Scandal, shock, uncertainty. The Queen tilted her head further, studying Silas with the intensity of a scientist examining an unexpected data point. You observe, she said. Not a question, an observation about observation. Silas met her gaze. Military training said look away. Intelligence experience said hold steady. Instinct said she already knew more than she was revealing. Standing as observation with less paperwork, your radiance. The words left his mouth before his brain could perform the usual threat assessment. Years of keeping silent. Months of being furniture. And now, apparently, his mouth had decided to hold a referendum on continuing to exist. Another pause. Somewhere in the back of the chamber, a minor official made a sound like a kettle achieving consciousness. The Queen smiled. It started small at the corners of her mouth, then spread like sunrise across alien features. Her eyes gleamed with something that looked like recognition, or possibly hunger. With alien expressions, the distinction could be academic. She dismissed the ongoing argument with a flick of her hand. The hologram vanished. Vexthor's arms completed their gesture, finding nothing but air. Several dignitaries stumbled mid-righteousness, their carefully prepared points dissolving like morning frost. Court recess, Queen Lysandra announced. The translation field rendered it in gold, making it less suggestion and more fundamental law of physics. I require a second opinion. She descended from the throne with fluid grace, covering the distance to Silas in 7 long strides. The court parted automatically, creating a corridor of shocked faces and hastily suppressed whispers. Silas stood his ground because running would have been worse. Up close she was more than tall. She was presence, authority wearing skin. Her eyes held multiple colors he suspected human vision could not fully process. Her scent carried notes of ozone and something floral he had no reference for. Walk with me. Not a request. Silas fell into step beside her, acutely aware that every eye in the chamber was tracking their exit. His peripheral vision caught Vexthor's expression. Not angry. Worse, calculating. They walked through corridors that hummed with alien circuitry and gossip, traveling faster than light. Silas said nothing because nothing was still working for him. The Queen spoke first. You do not posture. Statement, not question. She had a habit of those. I'm bad at it, Silas admitted. My shoulders never remember the angles. Her laugh was softer this time, more genuine, the kind of sound that suggested she was not used to making it. They passed through the inner palace where walls whispered data and history. Holographic echoes of past rulers flickered at the edges of vision, projecting the illusion of continuity, of control, of systems that worked because they had always worked. Silas had seen systems like that before, right before they failed. You see flaws in my court, the Queen said, not accusation, curiosity. Silas chose his words carefully. I see habits. Flaws are just habits that stop being useful. She stopped walking. He stopped too, because walking past a queen was a career-limiting move. Possibly a life-limiting move, depending on the queen. You are dangerous, she said. Not unkindly, almost appreciatively. Silas met her eyes, saw intelligence there, loneliness, the burden of ruling beings who told her what they thought she wanted to hear instead of what she needed to know. He recognized that burden, had carried a smaller version of it once. Only if someone asks the wrong question. Her expression shifted. Something like satisfaction crossed features built for displaying emotions humans were still learning to read. Then I shall have to ask the right ones. They resumed walking. She led him to a viewport overlooking the capital city. Towers of crystal and metal stretched toward a sky that held 3 moons and twice the stars Earth ever showed. Transit lanes wove between buildings carrying vehicles that obeyed physics only when supervised. Billions of lives flowing through systems designed by beings far older than humanity. It should have been beautiful. It was. But Silas also saw the inefficiencies, the redundancies built on outdated assumptions, the security gaps no one had noticed because everyone assumed someone else was watching. How long have you been standing in my court? 8 months, 47 sessions. And in those 8 months, how many things have you noticed that no one else has? Silas considered lying, considered deflecting, considered the 12,000 people who died because someone asked that question and the answer arrived too late. 214. Silence. Then tell me 3. He started with the safest one. Your security grid has been miscalibrated. The sensors are too sensitive to dramatic gestures and too blind to actual threats. Someone adjusted them approximately 6 weeks ago, probably during routine maintenance. They compensated for false positives by raising all thresholds which created gaps. She did not look surprised. Continue. Your translation field delays certain ceremonial dialects by 0.7 seconds. Skilled speakers can exploit that gap to say one thing while the subtitles claim another. I've watched it happen 17 times in the past month. And the third, this one was more dangerous. Chancellor Vexthor's threat assessment data is 3 weeks outdated. His hologram pulls from archived intelligence, not live feeds. Either he does not notice or he does not care. Either option is concerning. The Queen turned to face him fully. You learned this in 8 months of standing quietly. Standing is very educational. People forget you can hear when they assume you are not listening. Something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, something sharper, more focused. What else did you do before you became furniture in my court? The question hit like precision fire. Silas had prepared for many contingencies during his 8 months of invisible service. Background checks, security reviews, the standard paranoia that came with guarding beings who measured their lifespans in centuries instead of decades. He had not prepared for direct interrogation by someone who actually wanted answers. Intelligence analysis, Earth Defense Force, 12 years. Why did you stop Titan Station? Alarms that no one heard, reports that no one read, 12,000 people who trusted the system to protect them and died when the system valued procedure over truth. I learned that being right does not matter if no one is listening. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Around them the palace hummed with life, power, the machinery of an empire that had lasted 3,000 years and assumed it would last 3,000 more. And now you listen, she said quietly, instead of speaking. Yes. That is a waste. Silas almost smiled. Respectfully, I was told the opposite quite emphatically. She did smile. Then they were fools. She moved to the viewport, hands clasped behind her back in a posture that suggested she had learned to carry weight that never rested. I have ruled for 40 years, she said. 40 years of beings who tell me what they think I wish to hear. In this day. Advisors who polish threats until they sound like opportunities. Generals who promise victory while planning retreat. Nobles who agree with my decisions before I make them. Her reflection in the transparent surface looked tired, older than her years despite alien physiology that aged differently than human. Do you know what that creates? Echo chambers, systems that fail because no one is watching the data that contradicts the narrative. Yes, the word carried weight, confirmation. Relief, the sound of someone finding an ally in an unexpected place. She turned back to him. I want you to continue observing, but I also want you to report what you observe. Warning bells, red flags, every instinct that had kept him alive through 12 years of intelligence work and 8 months of determined invisibility screamed to decline politely and retreat to his comfortable irrelevance. I am not qualified. You are the only one who is qualified, she interrupted, because you are the only one who has been watching without agenda, without ambition, without the need to shape truth into something that advances your position. She stepped closer. Not threatening, almost pleading. I do not need more advisors who tell me what they think I want to hear. I need someone who tells me what I need to know. Silas looked at her, really looked. Saw the loneliness that came with absolute power and no honest counsel. Saw the weight of billions of lives resting on decisions made with incomplete information. Saw the same exhaustion he had felt writing his last report at Titan Station, knowing it would be ignored, knowing people would die, knowing the system did not care. She was asking him to care, to notice, to speak. All the things he had promised himself he would never do again. This will make enemies. I am aware. Chancellor Vexthor will not appreciate scrutiny. I expect he will not. The court will resist change. The court resists everything. That is what courts do. Silas weighed his options. Safety, invisibility, the quiet comfort of standing in corners and watching other people make a mistake. Against. The faces he still saw when he closed his eyes, the reports gathering dust in archives, the promise he had made to himself that if he ever had another chance to speak truth to power, he would not waste it being careful. I will need access to security logs. Transit records, communication intercepts. The Queen smiled. Done. And I remain a guard. No official title, no formal authority. Why, because the moment I have status, people start performing for me instead of ignoring me. I need them to keep ignoring me. Understanding lit her features. You wish to remain invisible. I wish to remain useful. In my experience, the two are often the same. She extended her hand, a human gesture barred from diplomatic protocols. The fact that she offered it first was significant. The fact that he accepted it was more significant. Then we have an arrangement. You watch, you report, and I listen. Yes, Your Radiance. They walked back through corridors that felt different now, less like a maze designed to intimidate and more like a system waiting to be understood. Nobles bowed as the Queen passed their eyes, sliding past Silas with practiced invisibility. Perfect. Let them keep ignoring him. Let them keep speaking freely within earshot of furniture. Let them continue making the same mistakes they had been making for decades, assuming no one noticed, assuming no one cared. Silas noticed. Silas cared. And now for the first time in 8 months, Silas had someone who would listen. When they reached the main chamber, the Queen returned to her throne with the same fluid grace she had descended with. The court reassembled quickly, nobles and advisors resuming positions with practiced efficiency. Silas returned to his post. 17 meters from the eastern pillar, 4 meters left of the secondary security node. Exactly where no one's attention naturally landed. Except now, when he met the Queen's eyes across the chamber, there was acknowledgement there. Recognition. Partnership. The session resumed. Vexthor launched into another presentation hologram, spinning through data that Silas now had permission to verify. Nobles postured. Advisors advised. The translation field hummed its color-coded lies. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. Somewhere in the depths of the palace systems, an alert chimed softly. Security protocols registering an access request. Guard designation Varnus Level 3 clearance expanding to Level 7. Transit records, communication logs. Intelligence archives. Tools for someone who knew how to use them. As Silas left the chamber that evening, he noticed something else. The security sensors tracking him had changed their pattern. Subtle. Deliberate. The kind of adjustment that happened when someone decided furniture had become worth watching. Vexthor, it seemed, had also noticed the Queen's attention. The game had begun. And Silas understood that invisibility once lost could not be easily regained. In the 3 days since their private arrangement, Silas had attended 2 more sessions. Each time the Queen's questions grew bolder. Each time his answers left the court more unsettled. Vexthor's presentations faced scrutiny they had not encountered in 70 years. Data was verified. Assumptions were challenged. The comfortable rhythm of unquestioned authority had developed an uncomfortable stutter. But tonight was different. Tonight Silas had barely slept. The security logs alone contained 14 months of data cross-referenced against 6 different monitoring systems, each with its own protocols and blind spots. Communication intercepts stretched back 2 years. Transit records covered the entire palace complex and 3 orbital stations. Somewhere in that ocean of information patterns were forming. Silas sat in his quarters at 0300 watching holographic data streams paint the walls with evidence of things people assumed no one was watching. Supply requisitions that did not match inventory. Encrypted communications routed through civilian channels. Financial transfers buried in budget amendments too boring for anyone to read. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a very expensive web chancellor, Vexthor. Nothing illegal, not quite. Just 1,000 small inconsistencies that meant nothing individually but formed a picture when assembled by someone who knew how to look. The kind of picture that got people killed if they looked too closely. Silas closed the files as dawn broke over Velkara. The 3 moons set in sequence replaced by a star that burned slightly bluer than Earth's sun. He had 6 hours before the session began. Time enough to shower, eat, prepare himself for what was coming. Because the Queen had made it clear during their last conversation. She intended to ask his opinion. Publicly. In front of the entire court. And Silas understood that this was not about gaining his insight. It was about establishing that she would listen to anyone who told her truth, regardless of rank or species, or the furious objections of beings who had enjoyed 3 centuries of speaking without being questioned. It was a declaration of war wrapped in a simple question. The chamber felt different when Silas took his position. Same pillar, same security node humming at the wrong frequency. Same nobles filing in with the weary determination of people performing a ritual they no longer believed in but could not imagine abandoning. Different because they all knew. Word had traveled through the palace with the efficiency of a virus. The queen had walked with a guard, spoken to him as an equal, granted him access to systems reserved for senior intelligence officers. Every rumor contradicted the last, but they all agreed on one thing. Something was changing. And change in a court that measured tradition and millennia was indistinguishable from threat. Vexthor arrived early. His 4 arms carried datapad's holograms and the confidence of someone who had controlled this room for longer than Silas had been alive. He glanced in Silas's direction, just once. A look that calculated threat assessment and found the numbers acceptable. Silas remained furniture, for now. The queen entered precisely on time, which several nobles noted with poorly concealed unease. Her hair was braided differently today, more complex. 3 interwoven patterns that Silas suspected meant something to those who understood the visual language of Zareth nobility. He filed it away for later analysis. The session began with standard formalities. Vexthor presented updates on border security resource allocations, diplomatic initiatives with the Kordash Dominion. The hologram displayed tactical readiness assessments, threat matrices, projected outcomes, all carefully curated to support predetermined conclusions. Silas watched the data scroll past, cross-referencing it against the logs he had spent 3 nights analyzing. The asteroid positions were still wrong. The threat assessment still pulled from outdated archives. But now he saw deeper patterns. Intelligence reports that arrived too late to matter. Early warning systems that had been quietly downgraded. Defense budgets reallocated to projects that existed only on paper. Someone was systematically weakening the Empire's ability to respond to threats. The question was whether it was incompetence or intention. Silas suspected he knew the answer. I recommend we proceed with the proposed reduction in outer system patrols, Vexthor concluded. The resources are better allocated to infrastructure development. Translation: pull back the ships that might notice things you do not want noticed. The council murmured agreement. Safe choice. Expected choice. The kind of decision that had been made 1,000 times before with no consequence except the slow erosion of systems no one was watching. Queen Lysandra let the silence extend. Then she turned toward Silas's position with the precision of targeting software acquiring lock. Guard Varn. The chamber froze. Not again, their collective expression said. Not twice. Once was diplomatic curiosity. Twice was policy. Yes, your radiance. What is your assessment of the Chancellor's recommendation? The translation field rendered her words in gold across every visual spectrum. No ambiguity, no plausible deniability. A direct question demanding a direct answer. Vexthor's arms stiffened. Several nobles made sounds like atmospheric pressure equalizing. Silas stepped forward. Not far, just enough to indicate he understood the question was serious and the answer would be heard. The recommendation is strategically sound if the underlying data is accurate. Pause. Let them process the conditional. However, the threat assessment appears to be based on intelligence that is approximately 3 weeks outdated. Current patrol reports indicate increased Kordash fleet movements near the border. Reducing patrols now would create surveillance gaps during a period of elevated activity. He kept his tone neutral, professional. The voice of someone reporting facts, not making accusations. Vexthor recovered quickly. The patrol reports you reference are preliminary, unconfirmed. We cannot make strategic decisions based on unverified data. With respect, Chancellor, the reports have been waiting for your confirmation for 9 days. In that time, 3 additional fleet movements have been detected by automated systems. The pattern suggests either a major exercise or preparation for offensive operations. Silence. The kind that preceded storms. You presume much for a guard, Vexthor said softly. Silas met his eyes. Saw calculation there. Anger held in check by political necessity, the look of someone who had just realized furniture had learned to bite. I presume nothing, Chancellor. I report what the data shows. The Queen raised a hand before the exchange could escalate. Chancellor, verify the current patrol reports. If Guard Varn's assessment is correct, we will need to reconsider our deployment strategy. It was not a request. Vexthor bowed. Perfect form, perfect deference, perfect concealment of the fury that flickered behind eyes that had seen 3 human lifespans come and go. Of course. The session continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Nobles whispered behind privacy fields. Advisors exchanged glances that required no translation, and Silas returned to his post aware that he had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He was no longer invisible. The walks began that evening. Queen Lysandra summoned him to the private gardens where environmental controls maintained Earth-compatible atmosphere and gravity for the handful of human staff who worked in the palace. Trees that had been imported at ridiculous expense swayed in artificial wind. Water flowed through channels carved to mathematical perfection. It should have felt natural. It felt like a very expensive cage. "You made an enemy today," she said without preamble. They walked side by side, her height forcing Silas to look up slightly. Alien physiology, alien mannerisms, but the loneliness in her voice was entirely recognizable. "I made an enemy the moment you asked my opinion." "You could have deflected, agreed with him, protected yourself." "Yes." "Then why didn't you—" Silas watched water flow over stones that had been placed with deliberate imperfection, the art of controlled randomness, the illusion of nature within the machine. "Because 12,000 people died when someone deflected instead of speaking truth. I told myself if I ever had another chance I would not make the same mistake." She nodded slowly. "Titan Station. You read my file." "I read your file after our first conversation. Earth Defense Force Intelligence Analyst. 12 years exemplary service. Final assignment threat assessment for Titan Station Colony. You predicted the Krethian raid 6 weeks before it occurred. Filed 17 reports. No one acted until it was too late." The memories came back sharp and cold. Alarm bells that no one heard. Data that no one read. Colonists who trusted the system to protect them and died when the system valued procedure over urgency. "Yes. You resigned the day after the station fell." There did not seem to be much point in continuing. They walked in silence for a while. The artificial wind carried scents engineered to simulate earth forests, oak, pine, growing things that had never grown in soil. "I have ruled for 40 years, the Queen said quietly. 40 years of being surrounded by beings who tell me what they think I wish to hear. Advisors who present problems as opportunities. Generals who promise victory while preparing contingencies for defeat. Nobles who support every decision before I explain my reasoning." She stopped beside a fountain that recycled the same water in perpetual circles. "Do you know what that creates? Isolation. The illusion of control masking the reality of blindness." "Yes." The word carried weight, recognition, relief. "I inherited an empire that had perfected the art of comfortable lies. Systems designed to preserve stability at the cost of truth. Protocols that value appearances over outcomes. And everyone around me benefits from maintaining those systems so no one tells me when they are failing." She turned to face him fully. "Except you. I have no investment in the system. No career to protect. No alliances to maintain. I am a human guard and in an alien court valuable only because I am irrelevant. You are the least irrelevant person in that chamber." "Dim?" Silas almost smiled. "Most would disagree. Most are fools." The walks became routine. Every evening after sessions that grew progressively more tense as Silas continued to provide assessments that contradicted official narratives. They talked about threat analysis and court politics and the 1,000 ways organizations failed when everyone was too invested in pretending everything was fine. She told him about inheriting a throne at 40, about advisors who had served her grandmother and could not accept that the new queen might want to rule differently, about the loneliness that came with absolute power and no honest counsel. He told her about Titan Station, about writing reports that gathered dust, about the faces that still appeared in his dreams, colonists he had never met but had tried to save with words no one read. Somewhere between the third and seventh walk the relationship shifted. Professional courtesy became genuine respect. Respect became trust. Trust became something neither of them had quite intended but both recognized. Not romance, not quite, but connection, understanding. The rare discovery of someone who saw the world through similar eyes and was not afraid to speak what they saw. It was, Silas thought, possibly more dangerous than romance. "What do you want?" she asked on the 9th evening. They stood at the viewport overlooking the city. 3 moons rising in sequence. Billions of lights marking billions of lives flowing through systems designed by beings who assumed they would last forever. Everyone wants something. Power, wealth, recognition. What do you want? Silas considered the question, considered the truth, considered whether she would believe it. "I want to be useful," he said finally. "I spent 12 years being right and irrelevant. I would prefer to be right and relevant. Nothing else. A decent cup of coffee. Human coffee. The synthesizers never get it quite right." She laughed. Soft, genuine. The sound of someone remembering how. "I will see what I can do." The next morning a package arrived at his quarters. Inside coffee beans from Earth, real beans, expensive beyond reason, and a note in precise alien script. Utility has its rewards. L. Silas made coffee that actually tasted like coffee, and thought about the fact that the queen of a 47-system empire had taken time to source an agricultural product from a planet 8 months away by courier. And then he went back to the security logs because utility required results, not sentiment. The data told a story. Vexthor had been chancellor for 70 years. 70 years of careful accumulation. Not wealth, exactly. The Zareth nobility measured value differently than humans. But influence, access, the slow construction of a network that made him indispensable. And somewhere in the past 15 years, that network had started reaching into places it should not reach. Encrypted communications with Kordash diplomatic channels, financial transfers to shell corporations that existed only in legal filing systems, arms procurement through intermediaries whose ownership chains dissolved into bureaucratic fog. Not treason, not quite, just business. The kind conducted by beings who understood that war was profitable if you controlled the supply chains and knew when the fighting would start. Silas assembled the evidence across 12 sleepless nights, cross-referenced communication intercepts against financial records, traced supply chains through 6 layers of corporate obfuscation, built a timeline that showed pattern and practice and deliberate intent, and understood that presenting this evidence would not result in investigation. It would result in war, because half the council was probably implicated. Because exposing Vexthor meant exposing the corruption that had metastasized through the Empire's leadership over decades. Because powerful beings did not surrender power just because someone proved they had abused it. They removed the person doing the proving. Silas stood in his quarters at 0314 days after his first public assessment, looking at evidence that could topple a government or get him killed, possibly both. The smart choice was obvious. Delete the files. Return to being furniture. Except that some fights were too big for one person and the Empire would survive or fail on its own terms. 12,000 people. The faces in his dreams. The promise he had made. Silas encrypted the evidence in formats designed to survive deletion attempts, stored copies in 7 different archive systems, created deadman switches that would release everything if he disappeared. Then he requested an urgent meeting with the Queen. She received him in her private office. No guards, no witnesses, just the two of them and the kind of silence that preceded decisions neither would enjoy making. "Show me," she said. He did. The holographic displays painted the room with evidence of systematic corruption, communications, financial transfers, the slow construction of a network designed to profit from conflict while appearing to prevent it. She watched without speaking. Her expression remained neutral, but Silas had learned to read the subtle tells, the way her eyes tracked data, the tension in her shoulders, the micro-adjustments in posture that indicated processing and calculation, and the kind of fury that burned cold. When the presentation ended, she stood motionless for a long moment. "How certain are you?" 93% confidence. The evidence is circumstantial but consistent. Vexthor has been manipulating intelligence to make threats appear less urgent than they are while profiting from arms sales to both sides. Both sides. Yes, the Kordash movements are not exercises. They are positioning for offensive operations, and Vexthor knows because he helped arrange their fleet modernization through intermediary corporations. She turned to the viewport, looked out at the city that had trusted her to protect it. If I expose this, the council will fracture. Half of them are probably complicit. The other half will defend Vexthor to preserve institutional stability. It could trigger civil war. Yes. If I do nothing, we face invasion from an enemy. We inadvertently armed Ledba nobles who profit from our weakness. Yes. She looked at him, really looked. And Silas saw the weight of impossible choices pressing down on someone who had never asked for absolute power but could not abandon it without catastrophic consequences. "What would you do?" she asked. The question hit like recognition. She was not asking for advice. She was asking for partnership in a decision that would define everything that came after. Silas thought about Titan Station, about reports filed and ignored, about the difference between being right and being heard. "I would..." The door exploded inward. Not literally. But the effect was similar. 6 guards in formal armor, 3 council members, and Vexthor, his forearms spread in a gesture that looked like concern but communicated triumph. "Your Radiance," he said, voice carrying the weight of sorrowful duty. "I regret to inform you that Guard Varn has been accessing classified systems without authorization. We have evidence of data theft and transmission to foreign intelligence services." The Queen's expression did not change. "That is a serious accusation." "Yes, which is why I brought witnesses and evidence." A hologram materialized. Silas's access logs, his communication intercepts, his file transfers, all accurate, all damning, all missing the context that explained why. "Guard Varn was accessing those systems under my authority," the Queen said calmly. "With respect, there is no record of such authorization, and the communication intercepts show encrypted transmissions to Kordash diplomatic channels." Silas felt the trap close. Sophisticated, multi-layered, the kind of operation you ran when you had 70 years of experience and unlimited resources. Vexthor had known, had been watching, had prepared countermeasures, and now Silas stood in a room with armed guards accused of treason, with evidence that looked conclusive to anyone who did not know the full context. The Queen met his eyes. A question there, silent, urgent. Trust me, Silas had spent 8 months learning to read her expressions. 14 days working beside her. 9 evenings walking through artificial gardens and talking about loneliness and truth and the cost of both. He nodded, once, barely perceptible. Chancellor, the Queen said, "Your evidence is compelling. However, I will conduct my own investigation before making any determination. The security protocols require immediate detention in cases of suspected espionage." "I am aware of the protocols. I am also aware that I am Queen, and the protocols serve me and be not the reverse." Tension crystallized. Guards shifted. Council members exchanged glances. Vexthor's arms adjusted in minute increments. "As you wish. But I must formally note my objection. For the record and the safety of the realm." "Your objection is noted." She dismissed them with a gesture that left no room for argument. They filed out Vexthor last, his expression carrying the smug certainty of someone who had just won a tactical victory and knew strategic victory would follow. When the door closed, the Queen turned to Silas. "He will force a council vote. Demand your arrest. Paint this as my judgment being compromised by association with a human spy." "Yes. If I protect you, I lose council support. If I sacrifice you, I lose the only person telling me truth." "Yes." She smiled, thin, cold, the expression of someone who had just remembered she was Queen for reasons beyond ceremonial tradition. "Then I suppose we will have to prove him wrong." "How?" "By doing what you do best, guard Varn. By watching, by listening. By finding the truth that everyone else is too invested in hiding." She moved to her desk, pulling up communication arrays and security protocols. "You have 48 hours before the council votes. Find me the evidence that cannot be dismissed. Prove that Vexthor is the traitor, not you, and do it while half the palace guard is watching for any excuse to arrest you." Silas nodded. "And Silas?" First time she had used his name without the rank. "Yeah, do not get killed. I have become accustomed to honest counsel." He almost smiled. "I will endeavor to survive." 48 hours. The clock started counting down the moment he left her office. 48 hours. Silas had operated on worse timelines. Titan Station had given him 6 days' warning before the Krathian raid. He had spent 5 of those days fighting bureaucracy and 1 day watching the inevitable unfold from 8 light-years away. This time would be different. This time someone was listening. He started where intelligence work always started, with the people nobody noticed. The palace employed 462 support staff. Maintenance workers who kept environmental systems running, technicians who calibrated holographic displays, translators who rendered 15 languages into coherent meaning, cleaners who moved through rooms like ghosts invisible to everyone who mattered, which meant they saw everything. Silas found the first one in a maintenance corridor at 0400, a Shen technician named Tovek calibrating sensor arrays that monitored atmospheric composition. 3 eyes, 4 arms, and the kind of exhaustion that came from working third shift for 20 years while nobles slept in climate-controlled luxury. "Guard Varn," Tovek acknowledged without looking up. "You are either lost or desperate. Judging by the hour, I would estimate desperate." "How long have you been listening to Chancellor Vexthor's private communications?" The calibration tool froze. All 3 eyes tracked to Silas with the focus of targeting systems achieving lock. "I have no idea what you mean." "You maintain the environmental sensors in the Chancellor's office. The same sensors that double as audio surveillance ostensibly for security purposes. 12 weeks ago you filed a maintenance report about interference in the feed. The interference corresponds exactly to encrypted communication bursts." Silence, the kind that preceded either cooperation or violence. "You could report that," Tovek said carefully. "I could, or you could tell me what you heard, because in 36 hours the council votes on whether to arrest me for treason, and I suspect what you heard might explain why the Chancellor wants me silenced." Tovek set down the calibration tool, pulled a data chip from a tool harness that looked designed for equipment but served equally well for secrets. "I kept copies," the technician said, "because maintenance workers are trained to document everything, and because I have been listening to powerful beings for 20 years and learned that sometimes the truth matters more than protocol." The chip contained 47 hours of audio, communications between Vexthor and contacts whose identities were carefully obscured, discussions of fleet movements and arms shipments and profit margins calculated in billions while speaking of defense budgets in millions. "Why didn't you report this?" Silas asked. Tovek's laugh was bitter. "To who the council half of them are on those recordings. Security they report to the Chancellor, the Queen—" 3 eyes met his. "No one asks maintenance workers for intelligence assessments." "I'm asking." "Yes, you are, which is why I am giving you what I have. Because someone should ask. Someone should listen. And you are the first guard in 8 months who looked at me like I might have something worth hearing." Silas found 6 more in the next 12 hours. A translator who had noticed discrepancies between what Vexthor said in council sessions and what appeared in official transcripts. a supply clerk who tracked requisitions that disappeared into bureaucratic voids, a cleaning worker who had photographed documents left carelessly visible on desks that should have been secured. The invisible people. The ones who moved through the palace like furniture ignored by beings who assumed observation required status and intelligence required rank. They had been watching. Recording. Waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Silas assembled their evidence like puzzle pieces. Audio intercepts, financial records, supply manifests. Communications between Vexthor and Kordash intermediaries that painted a picture of systematic manipulation spanning 15 years. But it was not enough. Not to overcome a council vote. Not to prove treason beyond political spin. Not to prevent Vexthor from painting this as the paranoid accusations of a disgraced human trying to avoid justice. He needed something definitive. Something that could not be dismissed. The answer came from the last place he expected. Ambassador Kirzin requested a meeting at hour 28. The request came through unofficial channels encrypted with protocols that suggested someone who understood operational security and did not trust official systems. They met in the public gardens. Neutral ground, open space where surveillance was difficult and assassination was discouraged by the presence of civilians enjoying engineered nature. She was tall even for Zareth nobility. Gray skin marked with ceremonial scars that indicated diplomatic service spanning decades. Her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen empires rise and fall and understood that history was rarely kind to those who chose the wrong side. God Vaughn, she said without preamble, you have become dangerously interesting. Ambassador, I am going to tell you something that will either save your life or end mine, possibly both. Silas waited. I am not who I claim to be, Kirsten said quietly. My credentials are legitimate. My service record is real, but my loyalty has always been questionable. Kordash intelligence. Not a question. Confirmation. She smiled without humor. You are as observant as reported. Yes. I was sent 20 years ago to monitor Zareth political stability and report on potential vulnerabilities. Deep cover, long-term assignment. The kind of operation you run when you are willing to invest decades for strategic advantage. And now you are telling me this because I spent 20 years watching an empire eat itself from within. Because Vexthor's corruption is not a Zareth problem, it is everyone's problem. Because he's been selling weapons to Kordash military contractors while manipulating your defense posture to ensure those weapons will be maximally effective. She pulled a data crystal from diplomatic robes designed to conceal many things. This contains every communication between Vexthor and Kordash intermediaries for the past 5 years. Financial transfers, arms shipments, intelligence sharing, everything you need to prove he has been profiting from both sides while engineering a conflict that will kill millions. Then, why give this to me? Because I have spent 2 decades lying professionally and discovered I am not as good at it as I thought. Because your queen asked you the one honest question and you gave her one honest answer and reminded me that integrity is supposed to mean something. Her expression shifted. Something like shame crossed features built for diplomatic neutrality. And because Kordash Command just sent new orders, the fleet is not conducting exercises. They are positioning for invasion. 72 hours from now, they will demand Vexthor be handed over for war crimes, or they will commence orbital bombardment. The world tilted. War crimes. The weapons he sold were used against Kordash civilian targets by rebel groups he helped fund. 12,000 dead in coordinated attacks across 4 colonies. My government wants justice. Your chancellor wanted profit. And now both empires are careening toward a war that serves no one except arms dealers and the beings who bet on body counts. Silas took the crystal, felt the weight of evidence that could prevent war or trigger it depending on how it was deployed. This makes you a traitor to Kordash. Yes. They will execute you when they discover what you have done. Yes. Why? Kirsten looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and chosen to see more anyway. Because you stood in a room full of beings who had every reason to ignore you and told them truth anyway. Because your queen listened when she could have dismissed you. Because I have spent 20 years facilitating lies and would like to do something honest before I die. She turned to leave, then paused. The council votes in 20 hours. Whatever you are planning, do it before then. After the vote, Vexthor will have legal authority to disappear you and everyone who helped you. Ambassador. She looked back. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Survive, then we can discuss gratitude. 18 hours. Silas sat in his quarters surrounded by evidence that could topple governments. Audio recordings, financial data, communication intercepts, the testimony of invisible people who had watched corruption metastasize for decades, and Kirsten's crystal containing proof of treason so blatant that even the council could not ignore it, probably. Unless they decided protecting institutional stability mattered more than justice, which they absolutely would. His comm chimed. The Queen's private channel. Encrypted. Urgent. Come now, private office, tell no one. He found her standing at the viewport looking out at the city that had trusted her to protect it. 3 moons rising, billions of lights. The machinery of an empire humming along with the confidence of systems that assumed they would last forever. Vexthor has the votes, she said without turning. The council will convene in 17 hours. They will vote to arrest you, and I cannot stop them without triggering a constitutional crisis. I know. Then you understand that this is over. No, it is just beginning. She turned, saw the data crystals in his hand, saw the expression of someone who had spent 48 hours assembling ammunition for a war that could not be fought with traditional weapons. What did you find? Everything. Communications, financial records, testimony from maintenance workers and translators and people no one thinks to lie to because no one thinks they are listening. And proof that Kordash is not planning exercises. They are planning invasion because Vexthor sold them weapons that were used to kill their civilians. He set the crystals on her desk. In 72 hours, Kordash demands we hand over Vexthor, or they commence bombardment. We can arrest him. Prove treason. Prevent war, but only if we act before the council vote gives him legal protection. She studied the crystals like they might explode. If I arrest a sitting chancellor based on evidence gathered by an accused spy, the council will call it tyranny. Yes. Half of them are probably implicated. They will fight to protect him because exposing Vexthor exposes themselves. Yes. We could trigger civil war, or prevent an invasion that kills billions. Silence. The kind that preceded decisions that changed everything. What do you recommend? Silas had spent 18 hours thinking about this, about Titan Station, about reports that went unread, about the difference between being right and being heard. We go public. Broadcast everything to all 47 systems simultaneously. Let the people see what their leaders have been doing. Make it impossible to suppress. Force the council to choose between justice and complicity in front of an audience that will remember. That is not how government works. No, it is how revolution works. She looked at him. Really looked. And Silas saw the moment she made the choice, saw the weight of traditional authority lifting, saw the queen who had ruled for 40 years by careful compromise deciding that some things mattered more than stability. How long do we have? 16 hours before the vote. 72 before invasion. I recommend we broadcast in 6 hours. Give people time to process before the council convenes. Make the vote about whether they stand with corruption or against it. Vexthor will try to stop us. Yes, which is why we need loyal guards securing the transmission room, and why I need you to trust people who usually guard your door to guard your truth instead. She smiled, cold, determined. The expression of someone who had just remembered she commanded armies and controlled star systems and answered to no one except the citizens she had sworn to protect. Make the arrangements. I will write the speech. 6 hours later, the palace security grid experienced what official records would later call a coordinated maintenance failure. Doors locked, communication systems rerouted, surveillance feeds looped, all the careful manipulation that invisible people could accomplish when they decided observation should serve truth instead of power. Silas stood in the transmission room surrounded by 6 guards whose loyalty to the queen exceeded their comfort with traditional chain of command. Tovik monitored the broadcast systems. 2 translators prepared to render the queen's words into every language simultaneously. And Vexthor's security forces, realizing something was wrong, were 3 minutes away from breaching the door. We are ready, Silas said. Queen Lysandra stood before the transmission array wearing formal robes that carried the weight of 3,000 years of tradition and the hope that the next 3,000 might be different. Begin! The broadcast went live across 47 systems. 40 billion beings looked up from their lives to see their queen speaking directly to them with an urgency that transcended normal political theater. Citizens of the Zareth Imperium, I speak to you tonight about truth, about corruption, about the difference between the government you deserve and the government you have received. She laid out the evidence. Methodically, clinically, communication intercepts played in real time. Financial records scrolled across screens. Testimony from maintenance workers and translators whose voices had never been heard in official channels. The systematic corruption. The weapons sales, the manipulation of intelligence, the engineering of a war that would profit the few while killing the many. Chancellor Vexthor has betrayed your trust. Half the council has been complicit, and I have been blind. Honesty, raw, unfiltered. The kind of statement that destroyed political careers and built legends. But I am not blind anymore, because one person had the courage to speak truth when silence was safer. Not a noble, not a general, a human guard who stood in my court for 8 months, watching, listening, and finally speaking when I asked a simple question. The camera shifted, found Silas standing at his usual post, silent, observant, unremarkable except for the fact that he had just helped topple an empire's leadership. I'm declaring emergency powers. Chancellor Vexthor and all implicated council members are hereby arrested pending trial. The evidence will be made public. The trials will be broadcast. and the people of this empire will decide whether we continue to govern by comfortable lies or uncomfortable truth. Outside the transmission room, Vexthor's forces breached the first security door. Inside, the broadcast continued. In 72 hours, the Kordash Dominion will demand we hand over those responsible for war crimes against their people or face invasion. I will comply, because justice matters more than pride, because peace matters more than tradition, because the lives of billions matter more than the comfort of the powerful. The second door exploded inward. Vexthor appeared, forearms extended, expression twisted between fury and disbelief. Behind him, guards loyal to money and tradition rather than oaths. He saw the broadcast, saw his career dissolving in real time. "You cannot do this," he said. Queen Lysandra turned to face him. "Still broadcasting. Still live to 47 systems. I am queen. I can do precisely this. The only question is whether you surrender with dignity or force me to demonstrate that justice applies even to chancellors." Vexthor's arms trembled. Calculation. Fury. The realization that 70 years of careful construction had just collapsed. The Council will never accept... The Council will accept what the people demand, and the people are watching. Indeed they were. Across 47 systems, billions of beings watched their chancellor face justice, watched their queen choose truth over stability, watched a human guard stand silent witness to the kind of government that asked the right questions and listened to honest answers. Vexthor surrendered. What else could he do? Fight a battle broadcast to 40 billion witnesses, resist when the evidence was playing across every screen in the Empire? He knelt. Not in respect, in defeat. And the Queen, having rewritten the rules of governance in the one 6-minute broadcast, ordered him taken into custody. The trials took 3 weeks. Public broadcast, every piece of evidence displayed, every witness heard, every lie exposed to the light that corruption could not survive. Vexthor was found guilty. 14 council members were implicated. All were sentenced according to laws they had helped write and assumed would never apply to them. The Kordash Dominion received custody of those responsible for crimes against their people. The invasion was cancelled. Peace negotiations began with a foundation of transparency that neither empire had attempted in 2 centuries. Ambassador Kirsten received asylum. Her 20 years of deception were pardoned by the testimony that prevented war. She now advised on Kordash relations, having proven that redemption could be earned through truth, another invisible observer who had become essential. And Silas Varn was offered a position, Minister of Truth, advisor to the Crown, any title that would recognize his contribution to saving an empire from itself. He declined. With respect, titles make people perform for you instead of ignore you, and I am most useful when people forget I am watching. The Queen understood. She had learned to understand his silences as well as his words. Then what will you do? Return to my post, but with your permission I would like to formalize something. Go on. The Observer Corps, training for guards, maintenance workers, translators, anyone who moves through the palace unseen, teaching them that observation is valuable, that speaking truth matters, that invisible people see things that powerful people miss. She smiled, the expression of someone who had learned that revolution sometimes came from the least expected places. Approved, with the understanding that you will report what they observe. Yes. 3 months later, Silas stood at his usual post, 17 meters from the eastern pillar, 4 meters left of the secondary security node, exactly where no one's attention naturally landed. Except now, when nobles spoke carelessly within earshot, they occasionally glanced his way, remembered that furniture might be listening, chose their words more carefully. The court had learned to fear silence, to respect observation, to understand that power without accountability was just corruption waiting for someone to notice. Queen Lysandra entered for the morning session, caught his eye across the chamber, a brief nod. Acknowledgement between partners who had built something worth protecting. The session began. Debates, proposals, the usual machinery of government, but different now, more careful, more honest, more aware that someone was watching and someone was listening and the invisible had become impossible to ignore. Midway through, an alert chimed. Soft, almost inaudible. Security grid detecting anomaly. Outer system sensors reporting unexpected fleet movement. Patterns consistent with either major exercise or hostile positioning. Silas noted it. Cross-referenced against expected traffic, found discrepancies, and raised his hand. The chamber fell silent, because when the silent guard spoke, people had learned to listen. Alert, outer system, unknown fleet, recommend immediate analysis. No panic, no drama. Just observation delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had learned that truth spoken clearly was more powerful than lies told beautifully. The Queen nodded. Begin analysis. Full transparency protocols. The system had changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough that when threats emerged, they were noticed. When truth was spoken, it was heard. When the invisible observed something important, someone listened. Silas returned to his post as analysts scrambled to assess the new threat, stood silent, watching, listening, exactly where he belonged. The pillar beside him hummed with the same frequency it always had. Environmental controls maintained precise atmospheric composition. The translation field rendered urgent analysis into 12 languages. And somewhere in the palace depths, the observer corps monitored systems that powerful people assumed no one was watching. Because Silas Varn had learned something at Titan Station that he had spent 8 months trying to forget and 3 months proving true. Being right did not matter if no one was listening. But if you stood still long enough, spoke truth clearly enough, and refused to be silenced when it mattered most, eventually someone would ask the right question. And when they did, you had better have the right answer ready. The session continued. The threat was analyzed. The Empire adapted. And the Silent Sentinel stood watch, no longer invisible, no longer ignored, and finally, after everything, exactly where he needed to be.